So welcome to the New York Selenium Meetup. I'm Lindsay. Chris Hoey is from Wireless Generation. He is the senior IT manager there, and he's going to be talking to us about their experiences with Selenium. Anything in particular you want to say before I ask for announcements and all that? Okay. Does anybody have any announcements that they want to give before we begin the presentation? I think Emma wanted to maybe say something.
Oh, yeah. I'll say a few words. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew, one of the engineering directors here at Conductor. That's Hema right there. She's the head of our QA program. We're really excited to be hosting this tonight with you guys. We do a lot of work with Selenium and automated testing, DevOps, that kind of stuff. We're also excited to hear what Chris has to say. A lot of the sort of things on the agenda are sort of things that we're thinking about as well. There are a bunch of conductors here as well. Most of us are wearing some sort of conductor shirt or jacket or hat or whatever. We are currently hiring for QA, test automation roles, and engineering roles. So if you are interested or know anyone who is, please say hi to one of us and chat us up. Thanks.
Did anyone else have any announcements they want to make? Anyone want to say anything? All right, so this is Chris Hoey, and I'm going to let him get started. And after, we can kind of hang out over in the kitchen area and enjoy the rest of the food and beverages. But I think we need to kind of start picking this up and heading out probably around 9:15ish. So just putting that out there. But thanks, Chris.
Thank you. So my name is Christopher Hoey. You can call me Chris. I'm the senior IT manager at Wireless Generation. I started at Wireless Generation in QA, and I eventually did more and more switch from black box testing to clear box and really trying to understand what was going on. And that got me interested in Unix administration. So I hopped over to operations. And now I'm an IT manager. We started a group called IT Analytics. We were sort of doing capacity planning, monitoring, metrics. So the switch, I just wanted to put that out there. I started in QA, so the background's there. I would call myself a Selenium abuser, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Been using Selenium since the beginning, so I have some history about pain of the tool. In the early days, it's come a long way. I'll talk about that a little bit. And I got the chance to see, the Selenium versus WebDriver case fight that was at a Google test conference a few years ago. I don't know how many people are familiar with Selenium being its own project and then WebDriver being another project, and now they recently merged. So we're getting the best of both worlds, which is really good. First, I wanted to stop and say thank you to Ashley, who couldn't make it, to Lindsay, Sauce Labs, Conductor. I personally know how hard it is to keep a meetup going. I tried to get a New York City quality assurance meetup going. We started in 2006. The content was hard to do. We couldn't really talk about Selenium back then because I don't think there was enough users. So, it slowly died over time. So I think Ashley and Sauce and Lindsay, what they're doing, creating a community around Selenium is an amazing thing. So I'm really appreciative of that. We just got a round of applause for them. Obviously, if we didn't have the tools and the community around it, so the Selenium developers, the JMeter developers, great stuff that we build upon. So I'm going to do a very quick show of hands to sort of get a pulse. I'm kind of personally curious. I'm a numbers guy to see how things evolved over time. So if you could just do a show of hands, you can show multiple times. That's totally cool. So first, show of hands, what your primary job title is. Are you in quality assurance? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, we're going to count. I should have said that. We're going to count it, and we'll put it in the slides. So when we share the slides, anybody that's not here, could get a number. So quality assurance, quickly, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right, around 10, 11,
Yeah.
12. Developers? Okay. About the same. Any ops guys here? Or gals, sorry. 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so experience with Selenium. Any total newbies just here to, see what it's all about, never used it? Okay. Don't be afraid. We all started somewhere. So 1, 2, 3, about 5. Tried Selenium ID. Okay. But not there. 1, 2, 3. You consider yourself a master at Selenium ID, so you know all the nuances and you're kind of fed up with it and ready to jump into the other tools? Nobody really? Okay. I would put myself in there. So tried Selenium RC, or now known as WebDriver. Okay. Probably a lot of the dev guys are there. Mastered it, so if you're really, really comfortable. Okay. Who's tying Selenium to a CI or build system? Probably the same guys. Cool. And anybody running their own in-house grid? Okay. Now, getting into what you use Selenium for. And this is where the abuser part might come in. Who's doing functional testing? So, new features, new development. Regression testing, a little bit more. So, load stress testing, what's Selenium? Okay. I put really there because I found it hard, but maybe we could talk afterwards about some of the ways to make it easier. Are you doing it just Selenium or third-party tools on top? Okay. And then just doing benchmarking with your Selenium tests. Anybody doing that? No. Sort of? Yeah. Put a hat. Automating data entry for some purpose. So this is more the abuse side of things. Using Selenium to drive a browser to do something you don't want to do manually. Okay, nobody's really doing that? I am one. I'm an abuser. Monitoring for operations. Does anybody have Selenium tests that tie to Nagios or some monitoring system? Anybody?
That's why we're here.
Sweet. I like that. That's a great answer. That's why I'm here. All right. Anything else? Bizarre things you're doing with Selenium? I can mention some, on the side later, if you give me enough beers. There are some very cool things you can do. But, all right, so, end of the questions. I just want to start with some disclaimers. I put this title together. It was sort of, the DevOps movement. Everybody sort of figuring out what that means now. Let's put up another term and try and figure out what that means. Start all over again. This is not a talk about best practices. A lot of what you're going to see, you're going to question why are you doing it that way. There's a lot of talk about Selenium IDE, so if you're more into the dev of WebDriver, language, test, like writing your tests in real languages, stick with me. We'll get there. And then, so times have changed, the tools have improved, and storms have passed. So my talk is geared towards a little bit around like 2006, 2008 timeframe. A lot has changed since, and I'll get into some of those details. Everybody can hear me okay? Excited? Someone? Okay. So quick about wireless generation. We create tools that make teachers' jobs easier. Primarily that means creating assessment tools, reporting around those assessments, really just empowering teachers to get more value out of the tests that they have to do. So they get some of the data and they could do grouping and a lot of neat features around that. We have a mix. platform, so we've been around since 2001, so we have a lot of mature code, we have a lot of mature platforms, but we're also getting our hands on a lot of new stuff. So we have a lot of new code, a lot of new platforms, and we're experiencing rapid growth, pretty much doubling every year across any metric you want to measure: employees, offices, data, everything. So going MacGyver in the early days of Ops. So we had a problem where the faith in our monitoring system was pretty low. We did not start with Nagios. I won't name what we started with. I don't want to badmouth them. But it wasn't very flexible. So the type of monitoring we were doing is, is a port listening for Apache? Yes, it must be up. Is JBoss port running? Yes, JBoss must be up. But all of a sudden we're getting things like, well, all the services are up, but we're throwing error pages. Like, that's not very helpful. And getting the monitoring tool to do any sort of neat browser-based testing looking for things wasn't really an option. We had some serious bugs in our third-party tools. So just things that were biting us. We had to detect them, be able to test fixing them. We had large increases in traffic, so we have rhythms based on times of year, beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year that tie to when students are primarily assessed. So it's pretty bumpy. We could be very busy, have a little bit of a lull, and then we're very busy. And so in operations, that's kind of a nightmare. We're also doing a lot of new work, so we're trying to keep everything up and running. Yet we have all this growth. We have a lot of tech debt. Our monitoring tool, we don't have a lot of faith in it. So we're pretty much at the point where we're getting MacGyver. Anything we have that can make our jobs better, we're going to use it. We're going to abuse it. It might not be the best practice, but it's going to help us get somewhere. Buy us time to get a better monitoring in place, get rid of some of the tech debt about the third-party tools. And so what we found is this time frame is right around when I switched from QA to operations. So I saw, we had our sysadmins sitting there manually, testing the website because we don't trust our monitoring tools. The customer care is calling saying, hey, the site's throwing error pages. So we had our sysadmins, which are really technical people, should be figuring out about the monitoring. They're actually testing our website manually, which is really bad. So what we did is I got them set up with some smoke tests that were just for operations. What this meant is we were using Selenium IDE because the barrier to entry is you have Firefox, you get the plugin, you can start running some tests. The suites we made were happy path tests, so we're not doing deep functionality, they're just smoke tests. And the key here is they shouldn't be brittle. So at some point, the tests were pretty brittle, and then over time we got to a point where literally the same tests have been running for 4 years, not much changing. So the point of these tests were to try and touch all the various parts of our infrastructure. So we have a big web stack, JBoss, Apache, PDF servers, all glued up on top. We wanted an end-to-end test that would hit all those pieces because it's not important that just the port's up and listening is whatever service actually doing its job. Another thing we wanted to do is you could use any username. So if you want to masquerade as another user that might have an interesting data pattern, you could use that user, and you'd be doing the same test. And then also we have a lot of environments to test on, so production, staging, because in operations you're managing all the environments, not just product. So this got us to the point where now our sysadmins, instead of manually doing tests, they were manually clicking play on Selenium IDE tests. Not great, but it's a little bit better. I could show you quickly what this looks like. So you can, what I'm talking about removing brittleness is we did a lot of just regexes for the word error because any of these tools were throwing errors into the page, like what a user would see. So can people see this or not really? Anybody not see it? Okay. I don't know, actually. I'll just sort of describe what we're doing. There's a lot of, we have a lot of nav buttons and our IDs. So some of these apps were not written to be tested with the common tools we have now. So IDs were sort of auto-generated. You couldn't predict what some of them were going to be. So what we would do is we notice patterns in our URLs that the pages would load. And there's a lot of user SIDs and dynamic info in there, but certain parts of the URL we would know would remain the same. So we'd write these regexes that would look for the URL pattern, be a regex for any value for the SIDs, and then we would choose open URL and then do about an assertion that error doesn't show up when we actually load that page. So I'll just show it running quickly. So we're actually, to figure out some of the paths, we actually grab the source of the page, and then that will tell us what links are available, and we'll do a regex from the source, go out and do an open URL from the source. Does that, people follow what that means? Some people doing that too? See some So sysadmins would run this.
So let me just clarify, is that because you said the pages were named fairly dynamically and you couldn't really know what the URL was going to be, or you couldn't get to it directly through the UI?
Yeah, so let me actually, so the UI, some of the locators were named just very strange because back then, you know, there's really only humans looking at these tools that do a lot around it. So you can see there's well, you can kind of see. This is a URL, dubgen, T per I, load class summary, and then you start having the SIDs. These would change based on what user you're on, what user you're using, what environment you're on, what app you're on. And so we were able, and so clicking around would load different pages, and the SIDs would be changing, but also the path would be changing. The path we were able to know what it is, but the SIDs we didn't, so we would look it up and use a regex to open it. Does that answer?
Well, I just want to make sure you couldn't do that by using the user interface to get to those pages?
Not, so we tried, and that was what was brittle. So development would change the IDs a little bit, or some of the IDs were dynamic. So and the DOM path was messy back then. So using DOM, rather XPath is, you know, and I could explain a little bit more. We couldn't trust XPath because of the IE issue. Everybody's familiar with how IE gets very slow. It was even worse back then, to the point it just was broken. Okay, so that was, you know, sysadmins running tests manually by themselves. The next thing is, let's write a script that will rotate through, use a headless server, run these suites of tests against each of our app servers. And then they would just, you know, serially one by one. Back then, you know, no concept of grid yet. Run in a loop, keep going. If any suite would actually show as a failure, this pipeline script would take the failure and, you know, mark it as a failed. And so you know, this server has failed because one of the suites failed. But then we were also taking the timings of how quick those tests were running, and we set some threshold ranges. And so if a server replied in under 30 seconds, we marked that as questionable because we've never seen a test that was successful finish in under 30 seconds. So something weird with Selenium was happening in that case. So we would, you know, we would want to mark, okay, maybe Selenium is failing for some strange reason just against that server. and then pass anything under 120 seconds, we consider that's acceptable. This is a full suite of tests, not just page one. And then, so, part of why we were doing this is the third-party bugs. We had a few memory leaks where, as time progressed, server response times started degrading. And so in Ops, we wanted to be able to catch when the server is in that degrading state, start bleeding connections off, and then use our load balancer and point them to new app servers that are healthy. Then we could go in, take the box out, take a look at it, put it back in the pool, and it's healthy. So then we also set a threshold of 301 seconds. Anything that takes longer than that, it's pretty much useless. So this, we actually had it running. On the last one is if a Selenium test was actually, the second the Selenium test was triggered, the first thing it would do was wipe the file and indicate that the test was running on that server. So white just meant the test is currently running against this server. And so what we would do is just project this on the wall, and then we visually in Ops could see, okay, Selenium's currently testing here. If this was moving across the servers, then Selenium's still running, because there was problems of Selenium would just die. So if it stayed here, and we went to get a coffee and come back, and it's still here, Selenium probably died. So this would be, rotating through them, and then the ideal state, everybody's green. But if somebody stopped into degrading or failed, we could start taking proactive action and start to recover them. So, everybody clear on this? But then we have a fundamental problem. We have, Unix sysadmins love Firefox, can't stand IE, and all of our tools are using this, and our customers are pretty much, 85% using IE. So one day we get a phone call, the site's not working, we're all scratching our head, we're running Selenium, it works fine for us. And then finally somebody asks, what browser are you using? And it turned out there was actually an IE specific bug that had really bad functionality for IE, but we weren't seeing. So we had to solve that problem, and the solution, Sauce didn't exist then. I wish it did, it's a great service. But back then there was a project called Romo, and there's a way to sort of do this, set up a bunch of Selenium RC servers, have it know what OS it was on, what browsers it could support, and you would check what your test would want, what test you would want to run against it. You could try, and it would sort of be a parallel Grid-like thing, and then eventually Selenium Grid came out. And these were solutions that let us get any combo of any browser, any platform, run tests against it. And now we use pretty much Sauce because it's easier to let them maintain the matrix of every possible combo browser OS platform. So that solved the problem. Now we get to actually do a mix of, let's use the browsers our customers are using for the majority, but let's also support those people that love the open source, the other browsers. So then the next problem we started to tackle is, can we use any of these tests to start doing load tests? And does it make sense to use Selenium as load tests? And what we found was there's a lot of overhead to Selenium. You have to start up a browser, wait for that, it runs tests. Sometimes Selenium will be just dying randomly. There's a lot of memory consumption. And if you got everything perfect and everything was working, you were pretty much topping out around 30 concurrent Selenium boxes. And past that, it just gets really weird and and to get Selenium up and running, there's a lot of packages that you need to do, a lot of coordination. There's a lot of hacks you have to do with regard to SSL and cross-browsing stuff. In JMeter, what we found, it loads very quickly. You can go up to a 300. We actually, most of the time, 500 is pretty safe, but we saw some strange behavior. We dropped it down. 300 concurrent sessions from one box. And then beyond that, maybe some strange stuff happening. It's just Java in a jar, and making it headless is really quite easy. I mean, it was pretty much designed to be able to be from the command line kind of thing. So we had this problem. We had our our tests in Selenium, and then now we're going to start maintaining some JMeter tests. We didn't really want to do that. So what we sort of hacked together is you could set up JMeter to be a proxy server. And so we would set that up, and it would be a recorder sort of like Selenium ID, listening for all the traffic. Okay, that's great. Why don't we play back our Selenium tests through that proxy, and that'll automatically create the JMeter test for us. So we did that, and then we started doing it a step further, that our tests could use any username on any environment. So if we, the nature of some of our data, there can be a concept of power users. There could be a teacher, there could be a municipal level user, and based on who you are, you could either have a ton of data or a little data. The ton of data users are very challenging for us because they could, easily take a whole server down just by themselves with the sheer volume of data they have access to. If you have one municipal user for, like, let's say, all of New York City schools, it could be pretty challenging to serve that user. So we wanted to find a way to start testing with those types of users. So we would write these queries that would go find users of some sort of pattern that we define. That would return back, and then it would continue on to do some variable replacement, pretty much just username and password. Then it would play back the Selenium scripts through JMeter, and then we would get JMeter scripts, and then we could just store those on the side in the repository and play those back based on whatever we were trying to test. And you found this to work very well. It's obviously a little bit MacGyver, doing strange things and using tools, but it actually worked really well and was instrumental to doing an Oracle upgrade, so to go to 9 to 10. And we wanted to see the effect of some of these power users, and it was really easy to do it this way. So I could show you quickly, hopefully you can see. How many people have used JMeter? Not too many. Okay. So it's an Apache project. You just download it. You get a jar file. And then you get this concept of a workbench. And you could actually do a lot of really powerful things here. But the quick thing to just sort of get the idea going is you add a proxy. So you just tell it what port you want to be listening on. You could do some flag filtering based on what type of content you want to be there. You want to have JPEGs, you want to exclude JPEGs. So you can pick whatever you would like to have. We usually would strip out the images because we weren't really that interested in that. So you get this going, you click start, and this is going to get you a proxy server running, which you would then go in your browser, Firefox in this case, and then you set up your proxy server, localhost 8080. So now, when you run your tests, and everything hopefully works, you'll start seeing JMeter's recording all the pages you're in. So at the end, what you would get is a JMeter script that now you could actually sit there and do things like loop. You could send 500 concurrent threads of that type of test. You could be smart about how you manage your workbenches and include tests of some type. You could do variable. There's a lot. It's just going from one tool to another tool pretty easily. So what this allowed us to do is troubleshoot, we start finding some of the harder bugs, and like I was mentioning, third-party tools and stuff. We had this problem that started where memory consumption started, spiking. The ops guys looking at Ganglia, they're like, well, we definitely have a problem. We're starting to swap. This is pretty dangerous. So we just, let's throw let's throw some memory at it to see if that buys us some time. It did buy us a little bit of time, but then it became very clear, something's happening here. We're going to have to dig into it and find out what it is. So we were trying to do this testing in our lower environments, and it was very tricky to see what was going on. If you looked at the long-range Ganglia graphs, you would see these little steps, but it was so hard to see and to get an idea of what was causing that. We started to see, is there a way we can make this more dramatic? Is it a user-based problem, like based on what type of user? So the dev team started digging into it deeper. They figured, okay, one of those municipal level users, there's one specific one that is pretty troublesome. And so we were able to take that guy and start playing tests with them, and then very clearly recreate the problem. And we were able to recreate this problem in every single environment, which gave us a very high confidence that, yes, that was the problem. And when they wrote the fix, we were able to play the same test back, and it was just flat. So it was a pretty quick, good way to do it. So one last thing I'll mention that we've been discussing about abusing Selenium is we have TVs like this around our office, and we're putting up dashboards of various content. And everybody thinks it's really cool to look at them, but actually setting it up is a little bit tricky. You have to figure out what you want to put out there, have some sort of service to put it up. If you put up a web browser, you could do a tab rotator, but that's going to, if somebody shuts the box down, then you got to recreate that. You got to log in again. So what we're proposing to try and do and look into is write a Selenium script that would set up your TV or your dashboard. Go in, log into all the tools you want to have, and so somebody would just play that script and then look at the full dashboard. And this is also helpful for like our remote offices. They want to see what we're doing. They're not in the kitchen in our Dumbo office. They want to see what we're doing. We could just send them, a simple Selenium script. Here, run this, and you'll be in all the tabs, and you'll see all the dashboards that you see. Just an interesting hack site. Coming back to QA Ops, it's sort of, for me personally, I was here, I came here. There was some dev work that I was doing, but I was really more over here. And so I think, Selenium ID was helpful and a good transition there. Obviously the dev and QA guys are doing a lot of the WebDriver stuff. The pure DevOps guys are sort of merging everything. But I think there's room to say, based on what your needs are, what tools are available, there's a lot just here that you could do to get a lot of them through Ops. The Ops guys and the QA guys talking to each other can really get a lot of benefit. There's been a lot of benefit here with regard to configuration management, but reaching out to the QA side and seeing, I just put in some memory and did a lot of system stuff. Wouldn't it be cool if I could actually run some tests and figure out what the result of my hardware change was? So, just an idea. Questions? We are hiring, so we have some T-shirts and brochures about the positions and what we're doing. Any questions?
Can you explain a little bit the connection from Selenium to JMeter? Can you talk a little more about it?
Sure. So these were just isolated scripts that we chained together with a bigger script. So this script, we would say we want a teacher with the most assessments completed for the most applications we offer. And so based on that criteria, we knew the SQL to write. So we would actually do the SQL, get back a username and password, like top 10 users of that criteria. And then it would loop through and one-by-one playback. So it actually edit the Selenium suites, replacing username and password with what was found here. And then it would actually automate triggering JMeter, playing back Selenium while JMeter was set up listening as a proxy, and then automating JMeter to save that and export it as a JMeter script. So there's a little bit of UI manipulation that was done there. There was a tool called Automated, I think. It's a GUI. That was a proprietary tool, but there are a lot of open source GUI like Windows manipulation tools that would help make this literally one script that you press go and it will do Selenium script in, JMeter scripts out. Does that answer you?
So I think so. So in your Selenium, say you're hitting your application at say for 8080, then you will make sure your JMeter is listening to that.
Yes.
That's what you're doing.
Yes.
Okay. So you're basically recording on the JMeter side, and then you run that script to do a load, or you modify it so that it
we
looks.
run that script to get a JMeter script, and then from there we could take JMeter scripts. And I didn't show it here, but you could actually build loops to play back what was recorded, and you could ramp up number of threads. So we'll do not just one run, but you could say up to 300, 500 concurrent tests hitting all of those URLs that were recorded by being fed from Selenium.
So JMeter gives you a report on the number of threads and
the reporting in
TPS
JMeter is actually really good. It'll give you graphs of number, which thread, the timing of the thread, error counts. There's a lot there.
I've been using Grinder. How does JMeter?
I don't know about Grinder specifically. I know Funkload, you could do something very similar to this. I can't speak for Grinder. Does anybody else know the answer to it? Anybody else using Grinder?
We used Grindr before. It uses a Java-based proxy and records Python scripts.
So do you think in theory you could do something similar? Set up a proxy and then fire JMeter to actually interact with it?
I think it's all very similar.
Okay. So maybe it would work. Any other questions? Thank you.
Awesome. So this is the corresponding to inspecting. I guess that's it. Feel free to enjoy the rest of the food and hang out and mingle and talk and.
Yeah, I'll be around for questions if you want to go deeper into something.
Thanks, guys.
I think there's still more food back there, and we just fulfilled our tags, so help us out here, Jeff.
Yeah, I didn't get into that.